Hi, and welcome to this short video on IGCSE Marine Science 6.4, where I'm going to go over some of the basic of aquaculture, focused on marine environment. This is, of course, made for my class, but anyone is welcome to use it. As always, any errors here are mine and mine alone. So as we talk about in the 6.3 videos, we now see an increase in the amount of aquaculture being used for production of seafood. And aquaculture will be vital in the future to supply people with food from the ocean, and it does offer some benefits. It reduces dependence on harvesting wild species. You don't have to go out and look for the fish or the marine life because you know where it is. If done on a large scale, it will provide more and cheaper seafood to many parts of the world, and it brings economic benefits to people who produce and export species raised by aquaculture. There are some socio-economic benefits. For example, if you have a shrimp farm, not even a small one, it will provide you and your family with extra income. So it sounds pretty good, but there are also quite a few drawbacks to large-scale aquaculture. So, like everything else here in chapter 6, whenever there's a benefit, there is also a drawback. And one of the big drawbacks by doing marine aquaculture is when you need to cut down existing vegetation to do it. So if you cut down a mangrove forest to build a shrimp farm, you lose some very valuable habitats. Pollution can also be an issue. Some types of aquaculture releases a lot of pollution that can damage the environment and also put a hinder on tourism on any nearby beaches. Eutrophication, where there's too many nutrients coming from the aquaculture, is a huge problem. We'll talk about that later in the eutrophication chapter. Damage to wild stocks is also a huge thing. For example, salmon who escape from fish farms will mix up with the local population, and that can lead to problems with people who are very interested in sports fishing, for example. So on one hand, there's tourists who pay for sports fishing, want to try to fish on the original stock. Parasites and diseases. When you have a lot of organisms close together, there's a bigger chance that diseases can spread, and parasites can also be a huge problem, and parasites can also affect the local or the wild population of fish. Lastly, some of the fish, especially stuff like salmon, they are predatory fish, so you overfish other fish to feed your aquacultural fish. So it's not all just fine. There will be issues, and how you work with them will decide if aquaculture is a good or a bad idea. So when we think about aquaculture, we might think about the trout or the salmon we will find in the supermarket, but there's many other species who also do quite well in aquaculture. Mackerel, for example, used for sushi. Fish, of course, is both freshwater and saltwater fish, but also crustaceans, such as shrimp, is a huge product. Mollusks, many kind of mollusks, mussels, oysters, echinoderms, such as sea cucumbers, can also be used for aquaculture. Some of the fish that has the highest price on the market, such as tunas and marlins, are very hard to keep in captivity, so you can't really use aquaculture for them. But for example, something like blue mussel, aquaculture is super easy and a very efficient way to grow a lot of blue mussels for sale. So we can divide aquaculture methods into open systems and closed systems. Open systems are situated in natural water, often coastal areas. Organisms are usually kept in cages or nets, and the natural movement of currents supplies oxygen and removes waste. Because open systems are directly linked to the natural environment, operators must make sure that predators can't enter the cages. We also need to ensure that pollutants do not leak out and organisms do not escape. Closed systems are not directly connected to the natural water. You place the organism in tanks so they're not affected by predators. There's also a much lower risk of pollution because you have the organism in tanks. But these systems are also more expensive as they need constant filtering of the water. Just as a small note, when I was a young man, I helped build an indoor eel farm here in Denmark where we had eels in huge tanks. So having marine organisms in tanks is possible, and if you do it correctly, it will have a much lower impact on the ocean than an open system. So, what are the requirements for good aquaculture? Well, first of all, you need to select the right broodstock. So, you want to make sure the animals, if we talk about animals or the algae, whatever you are breeding on, are strong. You want them to be fast growing. You also want to maintain the abiotic factors. Of course, if you are in open water, sometimes this just happens naturally. And if you're in tanks, well, you have to monitor it more closely. And abiotic factors is usually stuff as oxygen content, its temperature, its salinity, stuff you want to make sure are at the correct level to ensure that your organisms grow fast and are healthy. You need food and nutrients for your organisms, and you need to maintain a good water quality. Also, for some species, you need to separate the fish to prevent cannibalism because some of the smaller fish will be eaten by the bigger fish even if they are related. So in that case, you need a way to separate the bigger fish from the smaller fish. And lastly, and this is quite important, you need to be able to prevent diseases and parasites to spread among your population because that will lower your gain. It will affect quite a lot of animals if you have many animals living close together. So you really want to do everything you can to avoid disease and parasites in your population, in your aquaculture. Now, while aquaculture is a good way to produce fish, for example, or shellfish, fast and cheap, they also have issues. In Norway, for example, there is a huge problem with existential threat to the wild salmon, both due to the escape of captured animals and also to parasites going from the animals who live inside tanks to the wild population. So different countries have different ways of going about this. For example, on Iceland, they are really keen on keeping the natural stock of salmon strong and healthy, so they don't do this kind of farming of salmon, while Norway have a large industry for salmon farming. Last, aquaculture can be used to repairing environmental damage, and actually here at Ranum Efterskole, it is something we have worked quite a lot on. We have our coral lab where corals are being grown, so you can replant corals on a damaged reef. So the idea is that you grow small corals in a lab in controlled environment, and then later you can replant them on a reef where they can grow and establish a new reef. Mangroves can also be replanted. That takes a longer time for a tree to grow, but it's also possible. So aquaculture can in this way also be used to repair environmental damage.